Hello and welcome to Middle East Matters. I'm Melissa Bell. Coming up on this week's show, months of violence between Palestinians and Israelis result in harsher living conditions in the Palestinian territories. Closed border crossings between Syria and Turkey do nothing to deter the desperate from seeking exile. And destruction leads to creation in Homs, where artists are finding inspiration amidst the rubble left by 5 years of war. For more than 4 months now, the violence between Israelis and Palestinians has virtually been a daily occurrence, a wave of violence that some have described as the Intifada of the knives. And yet, the differences between the Intifadas and the current wave of violence are stark, not least because the attacks have divided Palestinians themselves, with many adopting an ambivalent attitude to the actions of a few, actions that lead to the suffering of all as Israel tightens its security measures on the ground.
Once again, life is back to normal in the streets of Kabatia. This village in the northern West Bank had been under siege by the Israeli army for 3 days, following a deadly attack carried out by 3 of its inhabitants in central Jerusalem earlier this month. The villagers were completely cut off from the outside world. As for the Nazal family, they couldn't even leave their home, as it was stuck between 2 checkpoints.
This is a civilian residential building, and when the army entered Kabatia, they turned it into an area for military operations. When they settled here for 3 days, we as civilians were stuck in the building and effectively used as human shields.
Even though access to the village has resumed, not all the restrictions have been lifted. Hundreds of workers have lost their permits to work inside Israel, and with them, their livelihoods. The owner of the stone factory has also lost his permit to enter Israel. He's worried because their sales rely almost entirely on the Israeli market.
These permits are vital for us for many reasons. We need to go to Israel in order to do our market research and find customers, to cash the checks that we receive, and simply to maintain our professional relations.
A total of 9 people from Kabatia have carried out attacks in Israel since October, and that's why the army says it has to take this kind of action. But the head of Kabatia's municipality disagrees.
The issue isn't related to Kabatia, it's related to the Israeli occupation, a refusal to comply with any of the international agreements, rules and decisions. Palestinians are doing this because of the pressures. When they destroy all of their hopes for peace, then the problem is not the Palestinians.
In a recent survey, over 80% of West Bank residents said they experienced harsher measures in their daily lives in the form of movement restrictions and loss of job or income. And more than half of Palestinians say they are against a third intifada.
I believe that our people have come to a conclusion that acts of violence will not bring about a resolution to this conflict. If the question was asked to them, do they support the civil disobedience that's happening, the disrupting of the occupation's daily routine, I think the mass majority would support that because it's based in nonviolence.
The last 4 months of violence have left nearly 200 people dead, mostly Palestinians who have carried out attacks. Where the continuation of that violence might lead is anybody's guess.
We head now to the border between Turkey and Syria, where tension has continued to build over the course of the last week. The crossings themselves remain closed, which hasn't deterred many Syrians from attempting to flee, a measure of the worsening conditions inside a country where the civil war is about to enter its 6th year.
A strip of Turkish land surrounded by Syrian territory. Here in Hatay, the barbed wire border stretches as far as the eye can see, and for those Syrians fleeing the war, they're almost impossible to cross. Yet the Turkish patrols can only cover so much ground, an opportunity for hundreds of Syrians who try to enter the country illegally. Most of them get caught, but some manage to slip through the cracks, like this family that left everything behind.
Planes started dropping bombs in the middle of the night. We took our children and ran, but many other children died there. I had to leave my wife and my 2-year-old son back in Syria.
They keep bombing our houses. Everybody dies. Nobody survives. People are fleeing the explosions and the bombs.
Russian bombs destroy everything. They can wipe out an entire building in a flash.
A living hell from which this family managed to escape. It's often the poorest that flee Syria, farmers with no relatives abroad. And crossing the border illegally isn't free, around 250 euros per family.
We spent all our money at the border. We had to pay the smugglers.
I had to cross the river by foot with my 2 children on my shoulders. We got chased by Turkish soldiers. We escaped and hid in a field, and we slept over there, underneath those trees.
These 2 bags are all they could take with them.
We had to pack at night. There was no electricity. This is all we have, 1 set of clothes per person.
Children and relatives left behind, and a home reduced to rubble. For this family, there's no looking back.
Now, it was just over a year ago that Kurdish fighters backed by American-led airstrikes recaptured the Syrian city of Kobani from the Islamic State organization. But not before a long and bloody battle that saw the majority of buildings and much of Kobani's infrastructure destroyed, which means that while peace may have returned to the town, the fight to rebuild it is far from over.
In January 2015, Kurdish fighters sent the Islamic State group fleeing from Kobani, and Mustafa emerged from 133 days of non-stop bombings.
One time, it seems I came to the wrong place. There was a fighter next to me, so I told them, like, please, just as soon as you lose the control, please shoot me. To be really scary, it's not to dead, like to be a prisoner in ISIS.
Today, Kobani is a pile of rubble. 60% of buildings are destroyed. These images were filmed a year ago by a group of young activists. Hospitals and schools razed to the ground, electricity cut off, and sanitation infrastructure destroyed. Now the activists volunteer to clear the streets and rebuild houses for the homeless, thanks to donations from Kurds living abroad.
We import partly from Turkey, but at the moment the border's closed and we can't get anything through.
To understand why, a trip to the town hall. The Kurds set up an autonomous administration in the city after the jihadists fled.
The Turks only allow humanitarian aid to pass through, like food. A few days ago, 144 trucks were waiting to pass. They only let a dozen through.
When the sun is out, Shamsa brings her children to the rooftops. After spending several months in a refugee camp, she returned to Kobani with her family.
We have no more neighbors. We're alone here now. We came back after the war, but we want to leave again and go abroad.
A journey to Europe that would be dangerous and expensive. Life in Kobani, meanwhile, is slowly returning, with good news arriving every once in a while. As dusk falls, Turkey decides to let in a few trucks filled with food, but still nothing with which to rebuild the city.
Those images of devastation have, of course, been repeated across Syria. Among those cities utterly ruined by 5 years of war, the city of Homs, devastated by 20 months of combat between regime forces and rebel fighters holed up there. As we're about to see, though, those ruins are now serving as inspiration for a group of Syrian artists.
This Syrian movie, It's Raining on Homs, was made during the summer of 2014. It tells the story of 2 sisters who go back to their hometown looking for their missing brother. The crew spent 100 days filming in the ruins, 3 months after rebels were driven out of the city by the regime under a truce deal. A year and a half later, Joud Said is back shooting another movie, this time in Damascus. For this filmmaker, who won the Best Arab Film Award at the 2015 Cairo Film Festival, the ruins in Homs were more than just a prop.
These ruins show what we as human beings are capable of in terms of material destruction. At the same time, they tell the story of the city and its residents, who have scattered and disappeared. So it's a way to carry their memories, their names, their tears and their pain.
Once nicknamed the capital of the revolution by opponents of President Bashar al-Assad, Homs has now been seized entirely by the army. But fighting has wrought massive destruction, grinding buildings into scarred concrete shells and wiping away signs of life, a source of inspiration for many artists. Yara Isa is a painter. A native of Homs, she had to move to Damascus after her house was destroyed.
I lived and grew up in Homs. I've seen the destruction of the city with my own eyes, and I've noticed how it affected people there, the displaced, the people who were killed. All these atrocities have accumulated in my memory, and that's why my paintings are inspired by the war. I use cold colours to suggest sadness.
Others, including photographer Ja'far Mir'i, have returned to Homs. He uses the destruction and rubble as a backdrop for wedding pictures to show that love endures despite the war. It's a message that resonates with some couples.
I wanted to get my wedding pictures done in this sad and ravaged area because one day I'd like to show them to my children, to let them know that despite all this sadness and destruction, life goes on.
More than 260,000 people have already been killed in Syria and half the population displaced since the conflict began in 2011. Life may go on for others, but they are left among the ruins.
And that brings us to the end of this week's programme. We'll be back, though, next week with another look at all the very latest news from the Middle East. Do stay with us here on France 24.